Normally, we talk to this guy on Wellness Wednesdays, Dr. Bradley Meyer at the Okoboji Wellness Clinic, but many of you might not know that Dr. Bradley Meyer has a deep military history to his name. Good morning, Dr. Meyer.
Good morning, Dave.
Glad to have you along.
Absolutely.
First of all, thank you for your service as we lead up to Veterans Day here. And if you'd be kind enough to kind of tell us your story, first of all, how did it begin?
Yeah, my family has always been a big family with the military. So it just kind of was innate that I felt that in some capacity I would probably be serving. And my grandpa was a World War II veteran. He was a B-17 mechanic, a master sergeant during World War II. And my uncle Kip Knutson, who lives here in Okoboji, he was an F-16 fighter pilot. He traveled all over the world with his family. And I used to go visit him in locations when he was, he would go 3 years here, 3 years there. And so he was an inspiring figure in my life, and I always wanted to be an F-16 pilot, but my eyesight was not going to allow for that. And I got going down the road of the medical career. My grandpa, that was the World War II plane mechanic extraordinaire, and he actually developed prostate cancer around in his 60s or 70s. So that he had a lot of influence on me. So I kind of steered me into the medical field. And then my uncle Kip said, "Hey, I always had a great experience with my flight surgeons when I was in the Air Force." So he's like, "Why don't you look into that?" And so that's what I did. I was at the University of Iowa and doing my biology undergraduate degree. And my Uncle Kip encouraged and wrote me a letter of recommendation to apply for a scholarship where the military paid for my medical school, or 3 of the 4 years of medical school, and I did that in Des Moines. And after that, I did my residency in the military. This was at Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. So this is near Omaha, just south of Omaha. So I was at the University of Nebraska Medical Center for my family medicine residency. So I am very, very thankful for the time that I experienced in the military, because it just brought me new experiences and a better perspective on the world. So I eventually had about 8 years in the military and had some payback time for the period of time that they paid for medical school. So I was my wife and I, we went to after Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, we went down to southern Georgia, 22 miles from the Florida border, called Valdosta, and that was Moody Air Force Base. So I was there for 3 years, and 1 year there I was the head of the family medicine department at Moody Air Force Base, and eventually got the shoulder tap that comes for most folks that are in the service. They can expect that they might get that shoulder tap to deploy, and so that came to me around 2010, that shoulder tap to deploy.
And that shoulder tap to deploy sent you where?
That sent me to, it sent me, at the time I couldn't say where I went, but it was near Yemen, and so over in the Middle East, and this was, again, 2010, 2011, and the country that I was positioned in, we didn't have a status of force. It's called a SOFA, no status of forces agreement with them. So we were on this postage stamp, and anytime we went off of that 1 mile radius, we didn't have some of the protections that you normally would be accustomed to for a protection perspective outside of that 1 mile radius. So I learned what it was. It was a feeling of a new appreciation for the freedom to go where I wanted, when I wanted, because I was largely in this 1 by 1 mile radius for 6 months. But and it was for all those that serve. They leave family behind. My newborn son Grant, who's now a freshman at Spirit Lake, he was just a newborn, and so I missed the first 6 to 7 months of his life, and my wife stayed back, Carrie, with Grant, and it was a beautiful thing, though, to see the community, our church, and the Air Force community, and our neighborhood in South Georgia, and family surround her. So it's whenever you see folks come together, whether it's a natural disaster or it's a strain or stress on the family, we got to experience that firsthand, and so always grateful for that. And the one thing I remember, Dave, is when I flew into the Middle East, and some of my colleagues that I went to residency with had a lot more. They went into more hot zones, quote unquote hot zones, mm-hmm. like in Afghanistan and such. And so I wasn't in a quote unquote hot zone, although I was near a hot zone. It was a pretty surreal experience to fly in to Aviano Air Force Base through Germany. Aviano's in Italy, and then go along the Iraqi-Iranian border when you could see our flight pattern, and then we flew into Saudi Arabia, all of this group of troops that were going in to relieve the next set of folks that were going to go back home. And so we went to this place in Saudi, and we stayed there kind of to assimilate and get our feet under us for about a week. And then I got was waiting for my final transportation to this lily pad near Yemen. And what I experienced, it was a pretty surreal moment, because I was with some, what they call them, flag officers, that they're high-ranking officers. At that time, I was a captain, but these guys were from other countries. So I think one was from France, and I'm not sure where the other one was from. But I was on a Learjet, and these folks got dropped off at different locations, and then I was on the last leg with two pilots at the front of the Learjet and me in the back. And I remember looking out and seeing sand and more sand, and not any green. And it was a surreal moment to think, wow, okay, this is going to be my reality for the next 6 months. But it was I led an emergency room / urgent care at this location for a 6-month period. So anything that was acute in nature that came in, or regular coughs and colds, those kinds of things. I was part of setting up this medical unit there, and anything that was really high acuity, then we would call in a plane. We had one guy that came in and degloved his fingers, so I mean his bone was sticking out. So that was going to be something that we were just going to support with IV fluids and get that wrapped up, and then we had him sent off via jet to an orthopedic surgeon in one of the bigger locations. So. But incredible experience. I always remember going to the seaside town. If I had to take somebody in for imaging, we'd go through the mountainside, and we kind of stood out a little bit as the tight cut haircut, and even though we didn't wear our military uniform going into the city because we didn't have the status of forces agreement. They always told us to rotate around your vehicle to make sure that nothing got put into that vehicle, that like some kind of explosive device. So when we'd go into these hospitals for these ancillary studies, imaging, we would come outside afterwards, and that was a whole nother appreciation for the hospitals that we have from a cleanly perspective and some of the resources we have. But we'd come back out and we would circle our vehicle and look for things that were out of place. Of course, my training was as a medical doctor, and all of our folks with us were medical techs. So we were kind of doing these cursory looks underneath our Toyota, and then we'd start it up and we'd haul off, and you just do these things that you just do them because that's part of the protocol and the standard operating procedure. But when you are away from home, and although I met some incredible people, different cultures, the one really cool story is that my uncle was actually at this same base years ago. He trained with this country's pilots, and he used to fly F-16s out of the same base. And there was an officer club here that both Kip and I ended up going to maybe 30 years apart. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is incredible. That's so cool. Okay, so after your 6 months in a place that until I guess very recently you weren't allowed to let people know about, then what happened?
Oh, I came back to Georgia, but I'm one last part. This is the irony here, this is like how God works and all these. We were a lily pad, and we had MRAPs. So MRAPs came to our location, and then they'd be shipped off to Afghanistan. So MRAPs are these armored vehicles that would divert the blast of an IED, so a roadside explosive. So initially during the early part of Afghanistan, a lot of our troops were just having these horrible injuries, and they developed these MRAPs, which would divert the force of the explosion, and essentially helping save people's brains from traumatic brain injury. So as we roll forward here to 2024 in doing hyperbaric therapy and working with traumatic brain injury, there was definitely some foreshadowing with the MRAPs that came into that location. So hadn't really thought of that before until now, but that's kind of a cool thing.
That is.
But so I came back to Georgia, and at that point I had the option to make a career out of the military, which would have been another 12 years versus complete my duty. I pinned on as a major when I got back, and decided that it was time to come back home. I always felt like Okoboji was calling me and Northwest Iowa was calling me. We went back to Des Moines, where I practiced as a physician there for 8 years before coming back here. But that's my story.
That's a great story. I'll tell you what. Number one, I can't even imagine being confined to a 1 mile radius. That's like, wow, that's so small. But then the fact that you and your uncle, same club, 30 years apart, that's crazy.
Totally crazy, and you just, the small things that you appreciate. So I always encourage people to expand outside of their comfort zone, because I for sure had a pretty good situation from a safety perspective, where some of my colleagues that went into those hot zones, where we call them outside the wire. So, I was lucky from that perspective, but I certainly, despite having benefits of not being in a real hot zone, you still feel the pressures of not having the creature comforts of what you're used to. And I just remember flying when we all flew into Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, never seeing so much green. The green just popped, and it was just so beautiful. And then to fly into, I think it was Newark, New Jersey, when we landed from the deployment, and getting back to South Georgia and being able to drive again, to be able to go to the grocery store, to be able to have that freedom to move about, quote unquote, you're free to move about the cabin space.
Wow.
And that's what it feels like when you are, the freedoms of being in this country that a lot of times we take for granted. you go into a place that's different, and it's a reality check, and you count your blessings.
Wow. Hey, thanks. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know you have a lot to do today. Thank you. We appreciate your service, your story,
Yes.
your family history. So cool. Thanks for sharing. Have a great day, and we'll chat again next Wednesday.
Yeah, Dave, just one last thing. Just
Sure.
a thanks to all of our veterans and the family members that have so, it's a beautiful thing, but it is a sacrifice, and mine was but a small one. So all those out there that made even far greater sacrifices than me, many thanks, much gratitude to those families and those service members.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer.